At first reading today, our first reading and our gospel reading are a little bit confusing and challenging. In the first reading, we hear Elijah told by the Lord that he is supposed to go and anoint Elisha as a prophet to succeed him. He goes and finds Elisha, and when Elisha realizes what's happening, he begs Elijah, "Please let me kiss my father and mother goodbye, and I will follow you." Elijah answered, "Go back. Have I done anything to you?" Elisha left him, and taking the yoke of oxen, slaughtered them. He used the plowing equipment for fuel to boil their flesh, and gave it to his people to eat. Then Elisha left and followed Elijah as his attendant. In our gospel reading, we hear about 3 men who are called to follow Jesus. The first one says, "I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus answered him, "Foxes have dens, and birds of the sky have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to rest his head." The second one says, "Lord, let me go first and bury my father." But he answered him, "Let the dead bury their dead. But you, go and proclaim the kingdom of God." The third one said, "I will follow you, Lord, but first let me say farewell to my family at home." To him, Jesus said, "No one who sets a hand to the plow and looks to what was left behind is fit for the kingdom of God." Certainly challenging and confusing and even seemingly contradictory readings. When our lectionary was being put together, the psalm texts, the responsorial psalms that sit in between the first and the second readings, these were chosen very carefully. They're designed to connect the first reading to the gospel reading thematically. Our church does allow for the use of what we call common psalms. These are psalms that were chosen that can be used throughout any time in a particular season. There are certain psalms set aside for Advent, other ones for Christmas, for Lent. For ordinary time, we also have a set of common psalms that can be used. There are wonderful pastoral reasons why a musician might choose to use a common psalm. However, I think something can be lost when we use those common psalms. Consider a psalm that's one of my very favorites, Psalm 95. I'm going to sing you just the refrain from Psalm 95, a common psalm for ordinary time. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. If today you hear his voice, harden not your hearts. We can certainly tie that text to the readings for today. In both readings, we see men who quite literally hear the voice of God. Their hearts pull them in one direction, but the Lord leads them in another direction. Today's psalm is actually Psalm 16. There are many wonderful settings of Psalm 16. One that I'm sure many of you are familiar with, Center of My Life. Let me sing you a little bit of that particular refrain. O Lord, you are the center of my life. I will always praise you. I will always serve you. I will always keep you in my sight. Certainly we can tie that text to today's readings also. These are men today who were willing to leave everything behind them and follow the Lord. They made the Lord the center of their lives. They committed to serving him. However, although that is a setting of Psalm 16, it's not actually the right refrain from today's lectionary. Psalm 16 has 11 different verses to it, and out of those 11 verses, Verse 5a is what was chosen as the refrain for today's responsorial psalm. You are my inheritance, O Lord. What an idea that the Lord is everything that we long for, everything that we anticipate receiving someday. Center of My Life has very similar verses, but that refrain is different. The refrain that the community is called to voice, to proclaim in response to the verses is different. I think that the way that we interpret, the way that we see the first reading and the gospel reading is very different when you think of those in the context of, you are my inheritance, O Lord. Indeed, in that first reading, Elisha kills his oxen. He had 12 yokes of oxen that he was out plowing the fields with. He goes back and he slaughters them all. He burns the plowing equipment. I can only imagine how much of his earthly inheritance that was, that he is giving up. He's forsaking his earthly inheritance to follow the Lord. He's saying, I'm putting aside my earthly inheritance and I am choosing the Lord as my inheritance instead. We see in the gospel reading Jesus calling those three men to do the same thing, to set aside what the world is calling them to do, what the world is expecting them to do, what the world is promising them as their inheritance, and instead to very dramatically follow him and proclaim the Lord as their inheritance. If you're with a group today, take a moment, or even if you're not in a group today, take a moment to read through all of Psalm 16 as it's given to us in the lectionary today. I'll go ahead and read for you now our psalm as it is in the the revised Grail psalm. That's the preferred psalm translation of the church right now. We're allowed to use paraphrases. However, let me read for you this particular translation. You are my inheritance, O Lord. Preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. O Lord, it is you who are my portion and my cup. You yourself who secure my lot. You are my inheritance, O Lord. I will bless the Lord who gives me counsel, who even at night directs my heart. I keep the Lord before me always. With him at my right hand, I shall not be moved. You are my inheritance, O Lord. And so my heart rejoices, my soul is glad. Even my flesh shall rest in hope. For you will not abandon my soul to hell, nor let your Holy One see corruption. You are my inheritance, O Lord. You will show me the path of life, the fullness of joy in your presence. At your right hand, bliss forever. You are my inheritance, O Lord.